crazy hackers writing Doom.
They're all tracking us, I say.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday Podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Jenny List.
This is episode 308, the worst one ever. Google's Find My opened and SAR on a drone. Happy Valentine's Day, Hackaday.
Hacky Valentine's Day, should that be?
Exactly. Have you ever given a hacky present to someone?
Sadly, I haven't. I should have done.
I gave my wife an LED heart thing that I made and
Oh, cool.
plugged in on USB. I actually had real fun with it. It was inside a box with a little window, and I put a bunch of aluminum foil on the other side, just inside the box, so you could move your hand in front of it like a cap sensor, and it would do like glowy patterns and stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
It was more fun for me. She was like, "Oh, that's really nice."
It's ever thus, isn't it?
And I'm like, I had a really good time making it.
Well, you appreciated it.
She appreciated it for the gesture it was intended to be. So I hope you all are having a good one out there. Coming up in just a month is Hackaday Europe, and February is a short month. So if you haven't gotten your tickets, do so soon. I'll leave the links in the show notes where you can find them. We will have talk announcements coming out soon, and we just finalized a keynote speaker, so that's going to be super interesting.
No, definitely very much looking forward to Hackaday Berlin. There will be several of us, several Hackaday writers coming along this time, so it won't just be me and Elliot. So come along and you'll meet us in person. It'll be like a Hackaday comments section, but real.
Come tell us we misspelled something in person. No, it's a really great time, and there will be workshops and talks and food and drink and music and soldering, and people are bringing tons of projects to show. It's like show and tell lightning talk session on Sunday morning. That's always super fun. I know a bunch of people have already been proposing talks for that. So have we made the form public for that? I don't think we have. I'll put out the Lightning Talks registration form Tuesday next week. So if you are coming to Hackaday Europe and want to give a talk, head on over and sign up. It will be first come, first serve, but we have a bunch of slots, but they fill up fast. So get on it if you want to give a talk.
It's also a chance to take a wander around Berlin, which is a fascinating city. Last year, I happened to wake up very early on the Sunday morning, so I took a walk around the city and ended up walking around what had been the political centre of East Berlin during the Cold War. All these wonderful monumental communist buildings. It was a unique experience. So I'm also looking forward to being in the city as well as the event.
Yeah, Berlin's awesome. If you are able to get in early, I encourage it. We also have event Friday night, going out and getting some food and drinking event Friday night.
That sounds fun.
So so if you're in town a little bit early, that's good. And I don't know, people usually hang out and do cool stuff Sunday as well. So
excellent.
So you have some time to check out Berlin too.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
All right, let's head on off to What's That Sound? Oh, this is one that you stand a chance of getting too.
Oh, that's ominous because I always make a guess and it's wrong, but never mind, go for it.
I gave this one to Al last week and he absolutely hammered it. So we'll see what happens. No pressure.
Oh, Hellschreiber?
No, but very close.
Okay. So what is it then?
Oh, damn it. Now I have to go look it up. I don't know.
It's not slow scan telly.
Nope. But you're right that it's a ham radio digital mode. It is.
I'm curious now. I've had my amateur radio license for, let me think, 37 years now. I'm in it for building radios, always have been. So while I know about these modes, I'm not a sort of mode guru. I enjoy building little radios.
I'm on your side of things too. I thought it was very obscure. This is the ham radio digital mode called Olivia.
Oh, okay.
As is pretty obvious from just listening to it, it's some sort of multiple frequency coding, right? Like it goes.
Yeah. Okay, I've heard of Olivia, but never used it. So yeah, that's had me stumped. Al would be your man on that one.
Al was like, "Oh, I hear that all the time. That's either this or Olivia." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay. Touche, dude. Touche."
Yeah, I mean, Al is the guru on that one.
I'll throw a link into the SIG ID wiki page where I got it from, and you should go check it out because it has, as Al pointed out last week, and I think I had to bleep out, it has the most marvelous waterfall diagram.
Cool.
Oh, look at that. So I'm looking through the answers. You are not the only person to have said slow scan TV. Someone else suggested
Well,
that.
I knew it wasn't slow scan telly. The reason I know it's not slow scan telly is that there's a bunch of friends of mine. We send memes to each other using slow scan telly over PMR 446 at hacker camps, which is probably highly illegal, but lots of fun sending random pictures of kittens and cartoon memes and what have you. And it also stumps the auger sometimes.
I'm looking through the answers. Not many people identified this one. We had
Okay.
16 answers, of which 5 said Olivia and some other people said digital modes, but nobody was specific enough and right enough that I'm happy with those. So I'm going to go with the ones who said digital mode Olivia, and 5 of them. So here goes a 6-sided die. 1 came up. Congratulations to Make Peace Not War. That would be an Olivia MFSK 500 hertz 16 tone transmission or my new wake up horror jingle. That is an outrageously correct answer and a good one.
Congratulations, first on winning and second on having all the technical details of the individual variant of Olivia. I respect.
Exactly. I love the other answers. Everybody seems to like the way it sounds. That's good. I'm not alone. Other answers include Olivia, isn't it? I'm considering that as my next ringtone. What else? Modem data, a bunch of SSTV people, DTMF, single tone. But basically, everybody was in the right ballpark. I'm happy to give the Hackaday Podcast t-shirt to someone who said Olivia, though. Make Peace Not War. I'll be getting in touch with you, get your t-shirt size, and get a t-shirt sent on out to you. Everyone else, listen in next week when we play a new sound, and you'll have your chance to guess. All right, well, let's start off the hacks. This week, I'm kicking off with an absolutely amazing hack. Budget-minded synthetic aperture radar takes to the skies. And this is a project by Henrik Forstén. One really good way to get high spatial resolution out of a radar system is to have an array of radars. So you get, many radars, each sending their pings back, and you do a little bit of DSP magic, and it can tell you what the surface they're all jointly illuminating looks like. The trick with synthetic aperture radar is using some math to get away with as if you had a big grid of radars, simply by moving the radars you do have around. In this case, he's got a radar unit and he's tied it to a drone and he's flying that around. In conjunction with some GPS data and yet some more fancy math that I'll talk about in a minute, he manages to kind of stitch all these together, and so he gets a fantastically detailed radar image of the ground taken from this drone. It is an amazing project, and it's super detailed. And if you want to know anything about drones or radar or how SAR works or, you can go check it out because he's documented every little part of this project. This is one of those projects where you're like, oh, how is this even possible that one person did this? And the answer is he's been doing this for 11 years now.
Wow.
And if you go back, I was like, this seems super familiar. I remember somebody was doing a bicycle-based synthetic aperture radar with GPS. And lo and behold, it's Henrik. And so I'll throw in the link to his 2019 project there. And that one is predated by his 2014 project, where he was just documenting how the radar works. And so, if you want to follow along at home, I would scroll all the way back in time to this first link I've got for you here if you want to learn about just how to build the radar. And then once you've got that up and working, you could try moving it around. So to do the synthetic aperture part, to do the pretending that you've got multiple radars, you have to move this thing fairly quickly. And to do that, you have to be taking the data in very quickly. And to do that with ultra precise timing, he's using an FPGA and a microcontroller together in the form of a Zinc 720. This is all on a custom PCB that he made, which is an amazing 6-layer PCB with the radar generator and the chips and everything all together. because it has to have extremely precise timing. It sends out a ping and then it has to switch over to listening, and then it correlates the sent ping with the received ping, right? That's the radar thing. There, the timing determines kind of what kind of resolution you can get out of it in terms of how accurately you can tell that something is far away from you. And so that's super important. And that part's done under kind of FPGA control. He's taking in so much data as this thing flies across, gigabytes of data per flight, basically. And then he takes all of those back home when he's done with the scan and loads them into a computer that then does the heavy crunching on GPUs, because doing the back projection from a whole bunch of simple radar images to a super detailed 3D model is actually billions and billions and billions of floating point operations. So he's doing that all on a fast GPU machine back at home. And there's details about how that's done too. Because the GPS positioning isn't super precise. I mean, GPS is kind of good to within a meter, but he wants resolution that's a lot smaller than a meter. So he needs to get much better precision on where exactly this thing is than that. He makes up for not having that data with an autofocus routine, which kind of says, it kind of tries to figure out where the radar would have been for it to look like this and for the previous image to have looked like that, and etc. And so it does all of that, again, using heavy DSP. And you absolutely should watch the movie that he made of this. This is amazing stuff. This is like absolutely, this project is deep and mind-blowing and extremely well documented and just absolutely inspiring. The fact that he was able to do this on kind of an $800 budget. He bought, quote, the cheapest Chinese no-name 7-inch FPV drone and got 2 of his PCBs made. He says that the run of 2 of them cost him $600. So,
Gosh.
yeah, so those are some expensive PCBs. I've never ordered a $300, including bill of materials PCB before. But the thing has a damn computer and radar module on it. Point is that he's kind of got an operating system for under $600. So he gets, in the end, a 3D model of everything that he's flown over with distance measurements and all that. Really astounding.
Not for the first time. This is one of those projects which humbles you by just how much amazing talent there is among Hackaday's community, among the people who we serve and the people whose projects we show. I learned something from reading up about this project, and even though I know I will never build one myself, I'm like Elliot, I'm in awe.
It definitely makes me want to build at least the radar part of it. And you can do the simpler radar parts of it, I think, fairly easily, where easily is in big scare quotes. So I'll throw some links into Greg Charvat's Build a Radar project, because he definitely walks you through it as well. But also this first one in Henrik's series, we called the article Extremely Detailed FMCW Radar Build, because, yeah, that's what it was. If those two don't walk you through how to build a radar, nothing will. Oh, yeah, and the absolutely most hilarious thing on this, in the previous project where he rode by on a bike, someone comes into the comments and is like, what would be cool to do is tie this to a drone and do the same thing from the sky. Lo and behold, 6 years later, here we've got it.
My first pick came from Sylvain Munaut, who has taken the Tiny Tapeout. We all know Tiny Tapeout. It's a project which allows people to make their own custom silicon, their own ASICs. The idea is that they have an ASIC run that has a whole load of cells on it, and you can, for not an enormous amount of money, get one of the cells. And so when you get your ASIC back, it's got all the others on it, but you can select yours and run your little bit of circuitry. We've seen some amazing stuff with it. We've featured it a lot over the years. But it usually is sort of people's own little projects, and it's not as though the ASIC is seen as a component like any other integrated circuit. But along comes Sylvain, and he has made a software-defined radio, because there was somebody made a analog to digital converter, and somebody else on one of the other runs made a Gilbert cell mixer, which are 2 components which you require for a software-defined radio. So he used, I think it was an RP2040 as a clock generator to make the intermediate frequency with the mixer. From that, he was able to make a down converter to make a baseband signal, which he was able to feed into the analog to digital converter. The output from the analog digital converter went into an external board, which was a USB interface, really just to pass the serial data stream from the ADC into his computer, when he was then able to feed that into GNU Radio and make an SDR. Now, it wasn't the world's best SDR, but it was good enough that when he'd finished with that, he was able to, using the harmonics of the RP2040 clock, to pick up commercial wideband FM broadcast stations. For me, it's magical because it turns the Tiny Tapeout from being people's individual projects and something of a, wow, this is a really special thing, a one-off, a curio, into, here, we have made some components that you can use to build other things with. I think that's the first time I've seen Tiny Tapeout used in this way, and I loved this project for that reason.
Like Jenny said, it's kind of like the PCB panel ordering sharing thing, except on a chip die, right? And so all of the little bits are essentially very small circuits. And that's what's astounding to me, is that these are two of however many different designs there are on one of these chips, 100. Each of these chips has all of those other ones on them as well, and you just pick out which one you want to run. And so if anyone builds anything useful, and if anyone sees building blocks in the past that they think are useful, they could do this. And I think that's the other thing that's really cool about the way Tiny Tapeout's going, is that all these are open designs. You can build on people's previous experiments and successes. And now that they're pushing off into this kind of less straight up logic, more experimental analog circuitry on the chip level, on the ASIC level, it's really going to be fun to see what people do with it. But yeah, first time I've ever seen two Tiny Tapeout chips used together to make a thing.
I think it was Tiny Tapeout 6 and Tiny Tapeout 7 were the two different releases.
Did we cover their demo contest? Because, yeah, there we go.
I mean, we've covered so many different Tiny Tapeout projects, not covering Tiny Tapeout, just covering things people had done on it. I mean, as I remember the Z80.
How's it possible you could fit a Z80 in the space that they have there?
I think they used 2 tiles to make the Z80. There was somebody, I think somebody did a Rick Roll, which was in hardware.
Why not?
Producer Rick Roll. Trying to remember ones I've written up. You know, you're writing up Tiny Tapeout projects, but you're not writing up Tiny Tapeout. You're actually writing up the project itself, you know. Hey, is Matt going to be at Hackaday Berlin?
Absolutely. If you're coming to Hackaday Europe, Matt Venn is going to be bringing his Tiny Tapeout workshop there, and you can join if you want to.
Excellent. Something to look forward to.
Learn how to do your own ASIC. Next from me, Leon Böttinger with Google Find My Tools running on an ESP32. This is a just released GitHub repository with a reverse engineering of the Android Find My network. This is Google's Find My network, not Apple's Find My network. This is not the AirTags. This is the brand new hotness, Find My Android device. Until now, we haven't seen an open source work along with that, and here it is. It's really cool. It includes the software you'd need to run on your computer to track, say, your own cell phone. You have to read the secret number out of it and put it into this Python script, actually, that goes and fetches, checks for a match among Google's data, and then tells you where your Android device is. And if that weren't cool enough, it also has code to make an ESP32 spoof itself as an Android device. And so you can build something that can, in the presence of other Android phones, tell you where it is, and you can find it later. And that's really cool. And in the 1 day since this has been public, there's been an addition to it. In fact, it's been ported over not just the ESP32, but any microcontroller that has Bluetooth and can run the Zephyr operating system can now do this. So this opens it up to a bunch of Nordic NRF 5 series chips, the Silicon Labs EFR32 series chips, as well as the ESP32. So now there are a bunch of microcontroller platforms you can use to make devices that you want to get tracked for free for you by Google's extensive location service that's, I guess, for free, given that it's provided by everybody who's got an Android phone and who has activated the service.
The closed down nature of the Apple system has always rather held it back in the hacking world, and that somebody's broken this one over will open up so many possibilities. I kind of backed another horse. I had the Samsung one on my keys, and I'm thinking maybe I ought to start looking at one of these instead.
Well, I guess first Tile and then Apple and then Samsung and now Google have all built out these kind of global networks of location snooping devices, whether you want them or not. And they can, of course, be used for both good and evil. You know, where are my keys? Where did I leave my cell phone? But also, if you can covertly plant one of these on a person, you can use it for stalking or finding out where they're driving without their permission or all sorts of horrible things. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing at all. One approach to mitigating this a little bit is to take the approach that Apple did early on, which is to give iPhone users an app that would say, I'm being followed by this device and it's not one of my own. So you can register your tags with your phone, and if it sees them following you around all the time, then it's not a problem, right? Like you presumably have your phone with you and maybe you have your keys with you, right? Like it's not a problem that your keys are stalking you. But if there's a device that you don't own and it's following you for, I don't know, I don't even know if they tell you how many pings in a row, but for a couple hours, they will tell you about it. And that was a neat idea, although they only offered it for Apple phones, leaving everyone else in the lurch. And part of the story here is that the CMU lab at TU Darmstadt, the university in Darmstadt here in Germany, worked on a program for both iPhones and Android called AirGuard that will alert you to trackers that are nearby. And Liam was actually also on the team that did AirGuard. So I'll throw in a whole bunch of links about not only the social implications of having trackers out there, but what you can do with them, how you can find them following you, and how you can basically take control of this whole situation, either for fun, for building your own hacker devices. Like we've got a couple demos where someone built a tag into a power tool battery. So in case that goes missing, they can find it. Or DocNod used this fantastic one. There's actually a couple bits you can flip, a couple status bits you could flip in the Apple AirTags one. He used that to check his mailbox to see if he's gotten new mail, if the flap on his mailbox has been lifted or not. And so you can also send a couple bits of data slowly over these networks if you want to. So there's all sorts of fun hacking you can do there. I think it's important that people understand this technology and are able to detect if there are trackers around them, because I think that the possibility of universal tracking of people without their permission is, of course, a very bad thing. But at the same time, I think it's fantastic that we have this playground now that we can play in. So there are all sorts of sides, good and bad, to this. And I'm glad that we're seeing the open source software here to help us take control of it. Tell all your normie friends.
Yes. My next one comes from YouTuber Magic Stitches. It's a series of hacks to fix broken zippers. Now, Zipper is a 20th century masterpiece of technology. We actually a few years ago, back in 2018, published, I think it was Dan wrote it from memory, a guide to the history of the zipper and how they work and stuff. I'll stick the link in there. It's a masterpiece of 20th century technology. If you find an old one, it'll be made of brass, and though they have their own problems, they tend to be a bit more robust. But modern ones are made of nylon. And as everybody who's ever owned a piece of clothing knows, they have their problems. They break. The teeth break. They stop meshing. The bit at the bottom where you stick them together breaks. And your piece of clothing is rendered useless. If you've ever made clothing, you'll know how difficult it is to line up zips when you're making clothing. And it's certainly a royal pain to replace zips. I freely admit I'm not terribly good at doing that. And so this video, on the face of it, is quite a simple thing. It's a repair video, but it is so useful on so many applications to so many people. I felt this one had to be in the featured hacks. It's the video I've been waiting for years. It taught me quite a lot of things, and I'm certainly going to use these at some point to repair zips.
Oh, I'm gonna have to give this a watch. I'll admit I haven't watched it yet, but I will absolutely have to. I second what you're saying about the zipper being like there are a bunch of simple things out there that surprise me that they are so cheaply and precisely made. And if you think about like the way those teeth on those brass zippers link together, I guess also the nylon ones, but at least there's a little give there. I'm just shocked that the brass ones work at all. Like, how do you make the machine that makes those so
Well,
precisely that they just go?
if you read the piece from 2018, you'll see that getting to that zip design took quite a few decades' work from an inventor. But I won't spoil the fun. Go away and read it.
Thanks. Well, speaking of things we just found beautiful, here's Hearing What the Bats Hear. This is a video by IFTA zooming in on sound, an ultrasonic sound exploration, where he presents a lot of the interesting recordings he's made in the ultrasound world, or from the ultrasound world, I guess. He's a musician and he thinks that this is a really neat place to go looking for kind of strange, otherworldly sounds to use as sound design for his music. And I certainly agree with that. But I'm also surprised by how non-otherworldly some of these things sound. In particular, like there's one bit where he drops a toothpick and records that in ultrasound. And it does sound kind of exactly like he just dropped a 2x4 on the ground. And a lot of these things, if you think about it, make total sense from a physics perspective. It's taking resonations in a thing that we normally assume is this big and slowing them down. And that would be like imagining the waves took that much longer to propagate in the same stick back and forth from one end to the other. The point is that these are absolutely marvelous sounds, and you should watch this whole video. I didn't throw a link in, but I left it as the headline picture, dropping a ping pong ball into an espresso cup. Slowed down by a factor of 4 is absolutely fantastic. If you want to do these kinds of recordings yourself, the gear he's using is maybe a little bit expensive. He got a $200-ish mic. You know, it's that expensive because it records up to 200 kilohertz and has its own digitizer on board. So it kind of does everything. But this strikes me, it would be a fantastic hacker project. And you could make your own high resolution ultrasound recorder and do exactly this sort of thing yourself these days. This kind of data bandwidth used to be difficult, but now it's, I'm sure you could do it with an RP2040. The trick is getting the right microphone, something that has high frequency response way up into the ultrasound. The microphone capsule, that the one that he uses here, is about $30 if you pick it up on Mauser or DigiKey. But there are others that are good to maybe the 120 kilohertz that are little MEMS microphones, and those are like 30 cents a piece. Totally cheap. And they put out these like pulse density waveforms. So, you can run them as high as you want, sample as high as you want, and try to extract whatever frequencies you want. It strikes me this could be a really cool $10 project to make an ultrasound recorder. And I want to see somebody do it.
I don't think I'm breaking somebody else's NDA by saying this, but I have a friend who designed a commercial bat detector that I believe you can still buy that uses just that. It uses a MEMS microphone element that's very cheap, and I can't remember which microcontroller it uses, but a sort of reasonably competent microcontroller. It just runs the code, the frequency shifting code, and is a very effective, bat detector. That's literally what it's there for. So yes, it's very much within grasp. As far as I know, he designed that thing probably just over 10 years ago. So if it was 10 years ago's components can do it, then 2025's components could definitely do it.
I was actually looking at one of the MEMS microphones that gets mentioned for this all the time. It's the SPU 0410LR5.
Okay.
Take that to the bank. But if you type that into a web search and pull up the data sheet, you'll see that in recent data sheets, they've actually taken note that people are using these for high frequency applications, and they have a non-binding, this is what our frequency response looks like out to 80 kilohertz section there. And I think what happened is that enough people discovered that this microphone was workable for ultrasound that the manufacturer decided to at least spec out the one they had on their desk, because it was designed to pick up people. It was designed as a normal audio range, 20 kilohertz people's audio range microphone, but it turns out to work much better. And these things are dirt cheap. So that's where I'd start.
My final hack this week comes from Mikey Makes Things on YouTube. It's using bleach to print on fabric, on clothing, but with the added twist that he's made a 3D printable stamp. If you imagine like the old-fashioned rubber ink stamp, this is a 3D printed impression of the design. You put it upright, facing upright, and you spray it with bleach, and then you can transfer it onto the fabric, and you let the bleach do its work, and then wash it out and dry it as quickly as you can, and you end up with the design on fabric. Now, I know somebody in the hacker community who's done an enormous amount of work with bleach and fabric, starting from the sort of tie-dyed kind of stuff through to patterns. But I've never seen anything quite like this with custom patterns with a 3D printer. I think we all like our hacker t-shirts in this game. And to be honest, getting a t-shirt made, you can just order one, of course, but to be able to make yourself one here and now with the tools in your hackerspace ready to go adds an extra magic to it. And I hope somebody makes a Wrencher t-shirt using bleach and a 3D printed stamp. I would love to see that. This one just caught my eye. It's, on the face of it, relatively simple, but I think it's one of those techniques that has the potential to be used in a lot of places and produce some very creative things, and I look forward to seeing them.
I was at Chaos Congress, and they always have people there doing screen printing t-shirts. So you can, you could say, hey, I want this design. Hey, I want that design on this shirt. Give them the shirt and they'll screen print it for you right there.
Nice.
And I love that. And this is like that, but, yet simpler, right? Like it's just a 3D printed form, spray some bleach on it, make sure the t-shirt doesn't like droop as it comes into contact with it, and you're done. Like it looks super, super simple. I recently saw a t-shirt screen printing demo where they essentially put white glue, Elmer's glue, over a metal mesh, and then you put the metal mesh in a laser cutter and you can cut out the pattern on the screen that way.
That's a nice idea.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. Because one of the things that sucks about normal screen printing is you have to do this whole photosensitive treatment thing, and you have to put the emulsion on there, and it's not particularly nasty chemistry. It's just a lot of steps, and it's a little bit of work, and anything you can do to kind of cut around those corners is good by me. All right, my first quick hack this week's come from Nicole Misako Nomura on the original punched cards. One of the original punch cards was, of course, loom designs and putting punches where it goes over and where it goes under to make elaborate weavings. She goes through that history and also writes up efforts to document and preserve these original loom and knitting machine patterns that were put out on punch cards. Second, Dennis from his YouTube channel Shake the Future has been melting everything in microwave ovens. To do metal and glass, you have to have a crucible that absorbs microwaves. And this is, I think, the best and most comprehensive video we've seen from him on his method to make DIY microwave oven crucibles. Last up, Zachary Parrish, make a secret file stash in the Slack space. Hard drive file systems allocate space for your programs or whatever data you're storing in blocks or clusters, and they tend to be of a fixed size. So like imagine 4K per block. And so if your file is 7K long, it'll be leaving 1 kilobyte of empty space at the end. This is a Python program to find these empty bits of space and hide other data in them. Of course, this is the most dangerous way to store your data because the file system doesn't know that you're storing it in the Slack space. And next time you write a file to disk, you run the chance of losing your data. So danger, danger. But if you want to use a hard drive as a place to secretly store data that no one else will be able to find, this is one way to do it.
My quick hacks this week come for us from Snappiness, who's taken a cheap toy camera, there's quite a lot of toy digital cameras around these days, and has reboxed it up to look like a classic twin lens reflex camera. He's really doing it so that he can have a waist level viewfinder, and the result is rather nice. I like this project because Some of these toy digital cameras can be ridiculously cheap, which makes them amazing hacker targets because you can do anything with them and it really doesn't matter. Anyway, up next is the wonderfully named Stabby Jack, who's made a tiny credit card sized ESP32 computer with a QWERTY keyboard. Now, we're seeing quite a lot of these coming out at the moment. People are starting to realise they can make useful little computers with ESP32. I liked this one because it shows how the art of making a keyboard is evolving. We've gone from little switches to rubber domes to whatever. This one actually used hinged 3D printed pieces to make the keys. I like that. I think the art of making keyboards in this way has a way to go, and I like seeing anything that advances it. And finally, we have Nyan Satan, who run Doom on something. Now, of course, Doom runs on everything these days, but it caught my eye because it was on a cable, or rather a cable adapter. Apple can never do anything simply. And apparently when they moved to the Lightning connector, their previous connector had HDMI pins on it and the new one didn't. So to keep their users happy, they had to make a Lightning to HDMI adapter. And there was something silly like the bandwidth they could send the data on USB through Lightning was lower than HDMI, so they had to compress it. So the adapter has to have a really meaty ARM processor in it. So, of course, along comes Nyan and runs Doom on it. Doom runs on everything. This one was kind of cool.
All right, well, that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week, I wanted to pick Tom Nardi's NASA Taps Web to help study 2032 asteroid threat. And if you've been reading the news last week, one of the things I'm sure you saw is that we recently discovered an asteroid just after Christmas in 2024. We discovered an asteroid that had just zoomed by the Earth 2 times as far away from the Earth as our own moon. Now, this thing is zooming way back out to space as we speak, but it's due to come back in 2032, and we don't know if it's going to hit or not. I guess the reason this was in the news is that NASA's estimate went up from about kind of 1% chance to 2.1 to 2.3% chance that when it comes back shortly before Christmas 2032, it might hit the planet. And that's clearly unacceptable. So the questions are, what can we do about it? And how can we find out if that's really the case? Because we didn't see it until it was on the way out, we didn't have super much time to study its trajectory and figure it out. Because this thing's orbit is so eccentric and it leaves the solar system, it's hauling out right now, and it is small, and it is getting harder and harder to see. And this is the part that Tom brought to this article that I thought was particularly interesting, is that in the next couple years, it's going to get further out than we can see it with terrestrial telescopes. And so NASA has agreed to quickly reschedule some time on the James Webb to point at this thing as it gets further and further out to see if they can A, hone down on its trajectory, and B, get a better feeling for exactly how big it is. Because if we do need to shoot something up there to push it out of its orbit, we need to know kind of how hard to hit it. And that, of course, depends on how much it weighs. When we were talking about this in our pitch meeting, we were like, why the Webb telescope? You know, it's usually pointed on things that are very far away, but this is something that's not so far away, but it's far enough away that terrestrial telescopes can't see it, and it's also tiny. And then we were like, but the Webb telescope, it's in the IR. And it turns out that that's also very useful to compare the IR with the visual light spectrum and use that to kind of determine what its actual size is. It's 40 to 90 meters in diameter, but that's a factor of 2. So that's a factor of 4 in its mass. And it'd be useful if we could narrow that down when it comes time to put another billiard ball up there and knock this thing out of the way.
The analysis I read suggested that it might cause something of the scale of the Tunguska incident in the early 20th century, which was very significant, way more apparently, than the nuclear bombs delivered in the end of the Second World War. Of course, the surface of the Earth is covered mostly in ocean, so the chances are it would land somewhere less harmful, but it's still not something you would want to consider.
The chances of it actually impacting this next time around are small, right?
Small,
2%. The scale of the disaster that would occur if it did hit is very, very large. And so when you multiply small by large together, you still end up with something that's pretty large. And so actually Tom points it out. He's plotted the impact corridor of what we think at the moment would be where it would hit in 2032 if it does hit. And it's a long, wide stripe, and about half of it's over the ocean and kind of passes through northern South America and then down across the ocean there and then across Africa over into India. So kind of Nigeria across Ethiopia over into India, passing over the Indian Ocean, which is good news, but also over a lot of places where people live. And so figuring this out more exactly, and even if it's going to hit at all, is, I guess, the point of putting the James Webb at it. Pretty cool. It does make me wonder how many times this particular asteroid has had a bunch of other near misses with the Earth and never hit us. The really creepy thing about this is that we observed it on December 27th after it made its closest approach to the Earth on December 25th last year. So, A, just a couple months ago. B, we saw it coming after it was already leaving. And that part is a little bit sobering. 2 times the Earth to the moon distance is still 500 and something thousand miles. It's still pretty far. But on an astronomical scale and on a I really don't like to have big rocks coming that close to my planet scale, it's pretty close. But this probably isn't its first pass around either. We've probably had a bunch of these near misses and just didn't know it. And so that's kind of the cool part and the scary part of having telescopes that are able to resolve these things, is that we might see more of them. And actually, speaking of can't miss articles, you should absolutely check out my can't miss article. The solar system is weirder than you think, where I talk about recent discoveries, that is kind of the last 20 years, in all of these other objects that are floating around in what we normally think of as our nice 9-planet solar system. Asteroids like this are actually surprisingly common. Pluto got downgraded as a planet because it really is just one of these trans-Neptunian objects. And it turns out there are thousands of crazy planet-like objects doing the same kind of dip into the solar system and then back out orbit that Pluto does. Don't even get me started on the asteroid belt and the things that fall out of that, like apparently this asteroid is. There's lots of stuff going on out there. It's not just 9 planets spinning around in well-defined rings, and modern telescopes have let us see a lot more of what's going on out there. And I love it that when we get a deeper look at things, things are, of course, more complicated and more interesting than we thought, but I don't love it when the big rocks threaten to hit the planet Earth.
My can't miss this week comes from our colleague Lewin Day, who has written a piece about the magnetic fonts that you used to see on financial documents. Now, these were ubiquitous over the later few decades of the 20th century, but we almost never see them now. If you don't know what I mean, there were the odd fonts with the sort of thickened bits at the bottoms of the tops that you saw as a line along the bottom of a paper check. And they were very clever. They were designed to be both human readable and readable by a magnetic sensor. This was from the days before optical character recognition, so they needed a way to register figures without computing power to try and see them as we would. It's very, very recognizable type of font, even to the extent that the design cues of sort of thickened chunks of the letters were used to denote futurism and futuristic things. If you, he has an example of a magazine cover from the 1980s about home computers, and it has the word BASIC, as in the programming language, in this sort of futuristic font with blocky bits sticking off it, which is derived from the same idea. In the best traditions of an informative Hackaday story, Lewin takes us through the history and technology of these fonts And we learned, for instance, that there were actually two completely different systems, because this was the days when the financial system was a lot less international than it is now. Those of us who lived in the Anglophone sphere, we had the ones with the blocky letters, but for most of the rest of the world, sort of Europe and large parts of Asia apparently, they had a different scheme which was designed by the French, which had letters which had a sort of barcode embedded within them and did the same job by a completely different method. It's a fascinating read. It kind of reminded me that, hey, I haven't seen one of those for so long, because I probably last wrote a check about 20 years ago. It introduced us to something that was familiar, and at the same time we realised just how little we know about it, and I found it a really interesting piece to read.
You say futuristic, and many of our readers have pointed out that the old school Hackaday font was exactly
Yeah, we used that. Yeah.
this MICR inspired font. And it's absolutely true. In fact, I went looking for the font and couldn't find it. I found a bunch of fonts that had only the numbers, so they would work for writing checks, but not for writing Hackaday. And let's see, commenter No ran it through What the Font and discovered that the old Hackaday font is computer standard regular. So if you want to write Hackaday in the old font, you can do that. The new one is Proxima Nova Bold if you want to get with the times. I hadn't realized it was as old as it was and as simple. The characters are printed out in magnetic ink, and it's designed so that when you run a cassette recorder read head over it, it makes different tones. You know, it's such a simple idea, but it's absolutely so marvelous that you could do that. As far as I can tell, it wasn't even like a multi-track read head. It was a single track read head, and I don't know if I believe that.
I'll have to find a cassette recorder and try it.
Yeah, if I were designing the system today, you know, now that we have stereo cassette players, and if you got the spacing right, you could use a multi-track read head to get different signals out of the top of the number and the bottom of the number, for instance. And that would certainly be helpful to figure out, like, the timing of the 2. It hits the bottom first and the top second versus a 5, which hits the top first and the bottom second. Like, it should be such an easy problem to solve from a modern perspective, but I am still just astounded that this dates back to the 50s and finally rolled out in the very early 60s.
When did you last write a check?
Oof, 10 years ago.
Must be more than that,
Maybe
I think,
longer.
for me. I genuinely can't remember the last check I wrote, but it was probably quite a big one, because when towards the end one didn't pay normal things with checks. But I really cannot remember what it was.
Yeah. No, me neither. That'd be fun to figure out what the last check I wrote was. I wonder what the last check somebody will write will have been.
I probably still have a checkbook from my bank somewhere, but the funny thing is they probably wouldn't accept checks anymore drawn on my account.
Yeah, my checkbook's in a drawer over there, but I'm pretty sure the checks have expired at this point.
Yeah.
Like a decade ago. I can't leave this without saying the one thing I love is Lewin's complaint about the number 1. Everyone's familiar with the MICR font E13B. This is the one with the gloopy letters and the worst 1 numeral ever committed to print.
Well, he has a point, but then again, it's iconic.
It's got this big fat foot on the bottom. I mean, it's not going to fall over.
That's true.
But it's a fat boy. It's a thick one. Well, that does it for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you do anything cool or see anything cool, send it on to us, tips@hackaday.com. And to check out all the links in this week's show, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. And until next week,
Eat, sleep, hack, repeat. Are you going to edit this bit out?
oh yeah, let's see, one more time.
Got to make sure you can pronounce these things. Elliot, if you can hear me, I think I've lost you.
Can you hear me?
Has it stopped?
You can't hear me. But it was a t-shirt screen.
We can edit this out in post, right? Can't we?
Oh, what a wonderful world.
To me, it still says future. Where's my silver clothing, damn it?
What is this?
Everything else is cool, but that's Nick's special fridge cool, you know?